Today, we'll talk about the oneness of religion in the Baha'i faith. You may have heard Baha'is say that all religions are one. This is a doublespeak. All doesn't mean all, it means most. And it's not even most the religions are one, since there are thousands of them, many of whom Baha'is haven't even heard of. So as most of the predominant religions are one. And here's the proof. This is a quote from The Guardian. He wrote, "The number 9, which in itself is a number of perfection, is considered by the Baha'is as sacred, because it is symbolic of the perfection of the Baha'i revelation, which constitutes the 9th in line of existing religions, the latest and fullest revelation which mankind has ever known. The 8th is a religion of the Bab, and the remaining 7 are Hinduism, Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and the religion of the Sabians. These religions are not the only true religions that have appeared in the world, but are the only ones still existing. There have always been divine prophets and messengers, to many of whom the Quran refers, but the only ones still existing are those mentioned above. So Baha'is believe in 9 extant religions of divine origins. In other words, among the myriad of religions out there, only 9 of whom are of divine origin. And these are the 9. The Guardian also wrote, "Regarding your question concerning Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon, as the Baha'i teachings quite clearly outline the succession of prophets from the days of Christ as being Muhammad, the Bab, and finally Baha'u'llah. It is obvious that Joseph Smith is not a manifestation of God. In other writings, he makes it clear that Joseph Smith is not a prophet at all, lesser or greater. So this is a succession of prophets from the advent of Christ until the present time. As you can see, it excludes Mani from Manichaeism, a 3rd century prophet between the advent of Christ and Muhammad. His religion lasted for 1,000 years, and he had over 10 million followers. Apparently, he is not a real prophet. And also excludes the 10 Satgurus of Sikhism. This has always been a thorn for some Baha'is who can't believe that Guru Nanak is excluded. So, going back to our slide, when Baha'is say, even if Baha'is told you that most of the predominant religions are one, this is a lie. It's incorrect and dishonest, because I'm sure they know the religion better than this. In fact, what they really mean by one is that most of the predominant religions were revealed from God and are now outdated and distorted. Let's take a look at the word outdated. Shoghi Effendi wrote, "If you feel convinced your son will really benefit from going to Father Flanagan's school, you could send him there. But in general, we should certainly always avoid sending Baha'i children to Orthodox religious schools, especially Catholic. Why? Why are Baha'is discouraged from sending their children to non-Baha'i religious schools if all religions are one?" The rest of the quote will tell you, "As the children receive the imprint of religious beliefs that we as believers know are outdated and no longer for this age. So they believe that your religious beliefs are outdated." Now, we'll look at the second word, distorted. The Bab wrote, "Verily, Christ is our word, which we communicated unto Mary. And let no one say what the Christians term as the third of three, inasmuch as it would tantamount to slandering the remembrance, who, as decreed in the Mother Book, is invested with supreme authority. Indeed, God is but one God, and far be it from his glory that there should be aught else besides him. The quotation 33, if you look at the footnotes, it's supposedly from this verse, chapter 5, verse 77 of the Quran. Now, in the beginning of this book, it wrote, in footnotes referring to the Quran, the surahs have been numbered according to the original, surahs being chapters, whereas the verse numbers are those of Rodwell's translation, which differ sometimes from those of the Arabic. In other words, this incorrect footnote is not deliberate. It's actually from verse 73 of the Quran, which you can see here. They surely are infidels who say, God is the third of three. For there is no God but one God, and if they refrain not from what they say, a grievous chastisement shall light on such of them as are infidels. It's referring to who? Trinitarians, the majority of Christians. Now, looking back at our quote, the Bab is claiming that Christians, the vast majority of them, all of whom are being the Trinitarians, are slandering the remembrance. Now, who is the remembrance? Well, remembrance, or remembrance of God, refers to the manifestation of God. In this context, referring to Christ. So the Bab is claiming that the majority of Christians are slandering Christ. Looking back at our quote, I'll show you another example of distortion. Abdu'l-Baha wrote, the real teaching of Buddha is the same as the teaching of Jesus Christ. The teachings of all the prophets are the same in character. Now men have changed their teaching. Men have changed the teaching. If you look at the present practice of the Buddhist religion, you will see that there is little of the reality left. Many worship idols, although their teaching forbids it. In other words, he claims that Buddhism was originally monotheistic, and now has become distorted, hence atheistic. He also wrote, the teaching of Buddha was like a young and beautiful child, and now it has become an old and decrepit man. Like the aged man, it cannot see, it cannot hear, and it cannot remember anything. He also wrote, the founder of Buddhism was a wonderful soul. He established the oneness of God, but later the original principles of his doctrines gradually disappeared, and the ignorant customs and ceremonials arose and increased until they finally ended in the worship of statues and images. Alright, now we'll look at the difference between Baha'is and non-Baha'is in the Baha'i writings. Abdu'l-Baha wrote, O ye believers of God, be not concerned with the smallness of your numbers, neither be oppressed by the multitude of an unbelieving world. So he's addressing the Baha'is. He continues, 5 grains of wheat will be endued with heavenly blessing, whereas 1,000 tons of tares will yield no results or effect. 1 fruitful tree will be conducive to the life of society, whereas 1,000 forests of wild trees offer no fruits. The plain is covered with pebbles, but precious stones are rare. 1 pearl is better than 1,000 wildernesses of sand, especially this pearl of great price, which is endowed with divine blessing. Ere long, thousands of other pearls will be born from it. When that pearl associates and becomes the intimate of the pebbles, they also will change into pearls. So he's actually referring to Baha'is as wheat, fruitful trees, precious stones, pearls, and non-Baha'is being 99.9% of humanity as tares, wild trees, pebbles, and sand. And this is what Baha'is mean when they say oneness of religion, oneness of humanity. On the last page of the Kitab-e-Gan, or the Book of Certitude, Baha'u'llah wrote, we conclude our argument with his words, exalted is he. He quotes this verse from the Quran. And whoso shall withdraw from the remembrance of the merciful, we shall chain a Satan unto him, and he shall be his fast companion. He quotes another verse. And whoso turneth away from my remembrance, truly his shall be a life of misery. Pleasant verses, huh? Now, the remembrance of the merciful, or remembrance of God, as I said before, refers to the manifestation of God, and in this context refers to himself. And Satan refers to the lower nature of human beings. This is the Baha'i understanding of the word Satan. You can see right here, Abdullah wrote, the reality underlying this question is that the evil spirit, Satan, or whatever is interpreted as evil, refers to the lower nature in man. This baser nature is symbolized in various ways. In man, there are two expressions. One is the expression of nature, the other, the expression of the spiritual realm. Now, looking back at our quote, I'll summarize it for you. Baha'u'llah is saying that if you reject him, you will be chained to your lower nature and you will have a miserable life. That's what he's claiming. So, you tell me, do Baha'is really believe in this oneness shit?